The wind howled through the ruined buildings, carrying the scent of ash, rot, and desperation. Once, this was a thriving city. Now, only silence remained, broken occasionally by the distant, unmistakable groans of the undead. Behind a makeshift barricade of overturned buses, scrap metal, and broken stone, 50 souls stood, watching, waiting, holding the line between extinction and survival. Among them was Commander Ilara Voss, a woman with deep scars on her arms and even deeper ones in her memory. She had once led humanitarian missions across continents, but now, she commanded the last organized resistance in this forgotten zone, Zone Echo 9. Beyond these barricades, there were no reinforcements, no safe zones, and no chance of retreat. This was humanity's final outpost. The barricade had been built hastily after the fall of New Canaan, the last major refugee center in the region. Survivors had fled under heavy attack, scrambling to this industrial edge of the city where narrow streets and broken factories offered some defensive advantage. Over 2 weeks, they turned the ruins into a perimeter, walls layered with salvaged wire, flame traps, and watchposts. Ilara walked the upper walkway, boots clanking against rusted steel. Her eyes scanned the horizon through binoculars. Nothing moved. That worried her more than anything. "Status?" she asked as she passed Juno, a quiet teenage scout who manned the eastern lookout. "No movement for 3 hours," Juno replied. "Which means they're either waiting for night, or planning something." Ilara nodded. "Double shifts tonight. No one rests too deep." Below, in the narrow courtyard that served as their central hub, Dr. Malik knelt beside a stretcher, treating a wounded engineer. The man had burned his hands while repairing the fuel line on one of the flame turrets. Resources were low, but spirits were lower. Most survivors had lost families. Some had lost hope. But no one had lost the will to fight, not yet. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. "Contact, South Gate," someone shouted from the guard tower. Ilara spun and raced down the ladder, her hand gripping her sidearm. Beside the gate, Corporal Rhine raised his rifle toward the outer road. Dust kicked up beyond the broken pavement as shapes began to emerge, slow at first, then faster. Too fast. "Not zombies," Rhine muttered. "Runners. Survivors." The gate creaked open just enough for Ilara to slip through with 2 others. 5 people stumbled forward, 2 adults carrying a child, an older man limping, and a teenage girl who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "They were everywhere," the woman gasped. "We thought we could make it from the river, we were wrong. They're coming." "How many?" Ilara asked, scanning behind them. "Hundreds. We barely made it out. They followed us through the flood zone." Ilara turned to the others. "Bring them in. Prep outer barricades. We may not have long." As the newcomers were escorted inside, Ilara climbed to the highest tower and peered south with her scope. Dust rose in waves. Then came the shapes, dozens, maybe more, emerging from alleyways and collapsed buildings like insects flooding from a hive. She activated the radio strapped to her shoulder. "All units, prepare for breach protocol. We've got a swarm incoming." Back in the command center, a cramped space built from shipping containers, Kaz, their communications tech, tried to boost the signal from the emergency beacon they had found in the ruins of Fort Layton. So far, no one had responded. The world outside the barricade was either gone, or ignoring their call for help. "Do you think this is it?" Juno asked as she came up behind Ilara. Ilara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed locked on the oncoming horde. "No," she finally said. "We've made it this far. We didn't build this place to fall in one night." By sunset, the barricade was lit with burning drums and mounted floodlights. Every fighter had taken position. The sound of the dead grew louder, gravel crunching, metal scraping, hulls echoing off the buildings. The infected were closing in. Dr. Malik handed out medical kits. Kaz double-checked the electrical charges for the fallback gate. Juno, now armed with a crossbow and flashlight taped to her shoulder, took a deep breath as she stood between Ryan and Alara. The first clawed hand appeared over the outer barricade. Then came the second. Flares lit the sky. And then all hell broke loose. The roar was deafening. When the first infected reached the wall, the defenders opened fire without hesitation. Gunshots echoed off concrete ruins. The outer flame traps ignited with a thundering whoosh, bathing the first wave of undead in fire. For a few seconds, it was like daylight, orange light blazing against the darkness, casting long shadows of shambling horror. From her post on the southern tower, Alara Voss barked orders into her radio. Maintain formation. Don't waste ammo. Take the front-line burners down, but let the traps do their work. The ground shook as dozens of bodies collided with the barricades. Screeching, clawing, teeth gnashing against steel and wire. The flame traps slowed them but didn't stop them all. Through the fire came the stronger ones, burned, but driven by something primal. Something unrelenting. Beside Alara, Juno fired a bolt from her crossbow into a sprinting figure that had made it past the outer traps. The shaft hit dead center in its chest, and the creature fell, writhing. Reload, Alara ordered. They're testing for weakness. Across the barricade, Corporal Ryan's squad was holding their section with brutal precision. Sandbag emplacements gave them a few extra seconds of defense as the horde smashed forward. One of the survivors who had arrived earlier, the teenage girl named Mira, had taken a position near Ryan with a salvaged hunting rifle. Despite trembling hands, she didn't miss her first shot. Below, the main gate shook under the force of bodies slamming against it. Inside the compound, Dr. Malik had converted the courtyard into a triage zone, readying for casualties. The wounded engineer lay unconscious but stable. Near him, the young boy rescued earlier cried silently in his mother's arms. "I need help up top," came a call from the east wall. Kaz dropped his tools and sprinted up the scaffolding. A power junction had overloaded, knocking out a floodlight. In the shadows, the undead grew bolder. He yanked the breaker open, sparks showering him as he rerouted the current. The floodlight blinked, flickered, and then roared to life. The zombies reeled for a heartbeat, disoriented by the sudden brightness. The defenders took full advantage, cutting down three that had nearly breached a breach point. For hours, the attack didn't let up. The infected came in waves, some fast, some slow, all relentless. At one point, they breached the outer barricade, and Alara had to lead a fire team into the smoke to push them back. She didn't hesitate. Her boots kicked up ash as she stormed into the chaos, sidearm in one hand, machete in the other. Ryan covered her from above, shouting, "You're insane, Commander." Only on the bad days, she shouted back, slashing through a walker that lunged from a burning husk of a car. By the time they secured the breach and pulled back, Alara was drenched in sweat, streaked in grime, and breathing heavy. But the barricade still stood. Just before dawn, the assault finally began to slow. The dead retreated, not because they feared, but because instinct drove them into the shadows during the day. The survivors knew better than to celebrate. It wasn't over. It was never over. "Report," Alara said, voice hoarse. 5 wounded, none dead, Ryan answered. "Ammo's down to 40%. East trap line is half melted, and we lost one of the generators." "And morale?" she asked quietly. Ryan gave a shrug. "Holding. For now." Alara walked the perimeter as the sun began to rise. Smoke still curled from piles of corpses. The stench was unbearable, but the sight meant one thing: they'd survived another night. Barely. Down below, Juno sat on a crate, inspecting her crossbow. Mira sat beside her, silent. "First fight?" Juno asked. Mira nodded. I didn't think I'd be able to do it. You did, Juno replied. That's what matters. Nearby, Dr. Malik was disinfecting tools and checking supplies. He approached Alara, wiping sweat from his brow. That generator's a bigger problem than we think, he said. Without it, we won't have enough power to keep all the traps and lights running through another night. Can we fix it? Not without parts we don't have. Alara looked toward the dead city. Beyond the barricades, somewhere in the industrial zone, there was an old solar converter station, unlooted, maybe even intact. But it was a risk. She turned to her crew. Get me a map. We're putting together a team. We're going beyond the barricades. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Because those words weren't just strategy. They were a dare against death itself. The city beyond the barricades was a graveyard in every sense of the word. At dawn, the 5-person recon team slipped through a hidden side gate. Alara led the way, followed by Juno, Corporal Rhine, Mira, and Kaz. They moved in silence, every footstep measured, every breath controlled. Beyond the walls, the silence wasn't comforting, it was a trap. The infected rarely made noise when they weren't hunting. And this city had far too many shadows. Their destination was the old Trinity solar plant, a facility that once powered half the district. It sat 3 miles east, surrounded by cracked pavement, rusting machinery, and buildings half swallowed by nature. If the team could recover the solar converters, it could buy them weeks of power, and possibly lives. We stick to alleyways and rooftops, Alara whispered. Avoid main roads. If we see even one runner, we turn back. Copy that, Rhine said, adjusting the strap on his rifle. Still think this is worth the risk? No, she replied. But it's necessary. Kaz carried a satchel full of tools and parts. He was the only one who understood the solar tech, and that made him both vital and vulnerable. Mira, despite being the youngest, had volunteered without hesitation. She carried a small pistol and a wrench strapped to her belt. Her eyes were tired but focused. They crossed the first few blocks without incident. Weeds had burst through sidewalks. Burned-out vehicles lay like skeletons in the street. In one alley, they passed a mural painted across a brick wall, a child's handprint in red, with the words, "Still watching," scrawled above it. Juno paused, uneasy. Keep moving, Alara said. Don't think about it too much. By midday, they reached the outskirts of the industrial sector. A collapsed overpass forced them to detour through an old train yard. The place smelled of oil and rust. They moved carefully between the hulks of forgotten freight cars. That's when they heard it, the shuffle. Alara signaled for everyone to freeze. From the far end of the yard, a faint dragging sound echoed, followed by a dry cough. Then another. And another. Dozens of them. The air thickened with dread. Juno pointed silently. Across the tracks, half concealed by the fog, a cluster of infected stood perfectly still, facing a wrecked train car. They weren't moving. They weren't groaning. They're dormant. Mira whispered. They're waiting, Alara murmured. Don't make a sound. One by one, they crept along the outer edge of the yard, sticking to shadows, holding their breath. The wind shifted, and for a moment, it felt like the entire horde would turn. They didn't. But one infected, a small child with a twisted leg and pale blue eyes, twitched, sniffed the air, and began limping forward. Myra's breath caught. The creature walked closer, closer still. Then it stumbled, tripped on a fallen pipe, and collapsed. Silence. Alara nodded, and the group moved again, faster now. They reached the outer fence of the Trinity solar plant just before dusk. The chain-link gate was locked with rusted wire, but Kaz made quick work of it. Inside, rows of solar panels stretched across the yard, some shattered, some overgrown with vines. They approached the control shed. Elara kicked open the door, ready for anything. But inside, there was no threat. Only dust, old equipment, and, miraculously, a functional control panel blinking with low power. Kaz's eyes lit up. This could work. Some of the cells are damaged, but the core relays are still good. If we strip what we need and wire it to the backup battery, we could reroute power to the compound. How long? Elara asked. Give me an hour. They set up a perimeter while Kaz worked. Mira stood near the door, pistol drawn, watching the street beyond the fence. Juno climbed onto the roof, scanning with her binoculars. Ryan knelt beside a shattered panel, his rifle ready. Time dragged. Then came the sound that shattered the quiet, a single scream, far off, echoing through the ruined city. Juno shouted down. Movement. South side. Fast. Elara ran to the fence and saw them, runners, maybe 30 of them, surging down the road like predators on a scent. They're coming. Mira yelled. Kaz ripped the converter core from the panel and slammed it into his pack. We have to go. Now. They didn't wait. The team bolted through the gate, sprinting into the alleyways, weaving through trash and ruin as the horde followed. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows behind them. As they reached the outskirts of the train yard, Mira stumbled, nearly falling. Ryan caught her, hauling her back to her feet without breaking stride. They're gaining. Juno cried. We make it back, Elara shouted, voice like steel. We all make it back. And behind them, the dead gave chase, faster, louder, hungrier than ever. The runners were closing in fast. Elara led the team back through the twisted maze of the train yard, boots pounding across gravel and broken rails. The sound of their breath, the clatter of equipment, and the guttural shrieks behind them turned the air into a storm of panic. Split at the junction. Elara yelled over her shoulder. We'll lose them in the tunnels. Without waiting for agreement, she veered sharply left, ducking under a leaning signal post and darting toward an open service shaft beneath the yard. The others followed instinctively. Kaz clutched the solar converter against his chest as though it were life itself. It was. They dropped down into the dark, an old maintenance tunnel carved beneath the city decades before the outbreak. It smelled of rust, mold, and history. Elara flicked on her flashlight, revealing walls lined with dripping cables and ancient signage. Yellow arrows, long faded, pointed toward forgotten platforms. We can't go back the way we came, Ryan said. Too many of them above. We won't, Elara replied. There's another route through here. These tunnels connect to the eastern subway line. It'll take us near the barricade. How do you know that? Mira asked, voice shaky. Elara didn't answer. Not yet. They pushed deeper into the tunnel, the walls closing in like ribs of some buried beast. Water dripped from the ceiling. Every few feet, Juno stopped to check behind them. The sound of pursuit had faded, for now. After 15 tense minutes, they came upon a rusted maintenance door, barely hanging on its hinges. Elara stepped through first, sweeping her light across a storage chamber littered with old crates and supply lockers. In the center of the room was something unexpected, a fire pit, long cold, surrounded by empty food cans and torn blankets. Someone was living down here, Kaz whispered. Elara knelt near the ashes, brushing her fingers across the soot. More than one. Not long ago either. A faint metallic sound rang out from the shadows. Juno spun, her crossbow raised. Did you hear that? They turned toward the far side of the chamber, where the shadows moved. A figure stepped into the light. It wasn't infected. It was a man. He was older, gaunt, and covered in grime, with a scarf wrapped around his face and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen hope in a long time. He held up his hands slowly. Don't shoot. I'm not one of them. Who are you? Ryan demanded. My name's Griffin. Used to be a security chief for the old sector shelters. Been living down here since the collapse. Heard you fighting topside. Figured you'd end up in the tunnels. You've been hiding here this whole time? Mira asked. Longer than I care to remember, Griffin muttered. But I've heard things. Seen things. You folks from Echo 9? Ilara narrowed her eyes. How do you know about Echo 9? He pointed to the backpack on Kaz's shoulder. That's solar converters from Trinity. Only someone desperate from the barricade would try something that insane. We don't have time for this, Kaz snapped. We need to get back before the Horde figures out where we went. Griffin stepped aside. There's a shortcut through the drainage tunnels. I can show you the way. But there's something else you should know. Ilara motioned for him to speak quickly. There's been radio chatter. Not from the infected, obviously, but from something else. A signal's been broadcasting on loop from an old military station near the river. Said something about a phase protocol. I thought it was noise, but last night I saw flares go up south of the city. Flares? Ryan asked. Human flares? Griffin nodded grimly. Someone out there's either trying to get in, or trying to get something out. Ilara didn't like the sound of that. A new player on the board could mean salvation, or more chaos. We'll come back for that signal, she said. Right now, we need to move. Griffin guided them through the lower tunnels, using a flashlight with a red lens to avoid detection. They moved quickly, passing rooms filled with collapsed ceilings, skeletons in old uniforms, and half-eaten ration packs. This had once been a shelter for hundreds. Now it was a tomb. Finally, they reached a steel hatch sealed with a rusted lever. Griffin wrenched it open, and moonlight spilled into the corridor. There, he whispered. That alley leads right behind your barricade. But before they could step out, Mira gasped. They're here. In the alley above, dozens of infected stood motionless, backs to the tunnel, breathing in low, rhythmic patterns. They're waiting again, Juno whispered. Just like before. We go quiet, Ilara said, gripping her machete. One sound, and it's over. They climbed the ladder in silence, one by one, stepping out into the shadows of their own district. Home was just 100 feet away. But between them and safety stood an army of the dead, completely still, as if waiting for a command only they could hear. The infected weren't moving. Dozens stood in the alley like statues, eyes open but unfocused. Their heads twitched slightly every few seconds, like they were sensing vibrations, like they were listening. Ilara crouched low behind a dumpster, motioning for the others to stay hidden. The barricade's outer gate was only 100 feet away, but the narrow path between these silent sentinels felt like a gauntlet of death. Juno's voice was barely audible. They've never done this before. What the hell is wrong with them? They're waiting, Griffin said. He had knelt beside Mira, shielding her. Same way I've seen them act in the subway tunnels. It's like something's controlling them. Controlling? Kaz whispered harshly. They're dead. There's nothing left to control. You sure? Griffin asked, eyes narrowed. Ryan, ever the realist, checked his magazine and scanned for escape options. We wait too long, they'll snap out of it. We move fast and careful, maybe we make it. Ilara stared at the unmoving horde. The solar converter on Kaz's back suddenly felt heavier than it had all day. They had come too far to let this end in silence and teeth. Mira, she whispered, you still have the music box? The girl nodded, pulling the small wind-up toy from her pocket. It had belonged to her younger brother, long gone now. Ilara took it gently. I'm going to throw this toward the east alley, she said. When they move, we run west, single file, fast and low. Kaz, stay in the center. Rhine, cover the rear. Nobody stops. Juno clenched her jaw. If this goes wrong. It won't, Elara said. It can't. She twisted the crank once. A soft, tinkling melody began to play, a fragile tune that floated eerily through the cold night air. Then, without hesitation, Elara tossed it far into the shadows. The second it hit the ground and bounced, every infected head snapped toward the sound in unison. Then, like puppets on a single thread, they moved. Not stumbling. Not lurching. Walking. Together. In formation. Elara didn't wait. Go. They burst from cover and sprinted across the alley. Every heartbeat felt like thunder. Mira ran behind Elara, Juno and Kaz following close, with Rhine taking up the rear. Griffin moved silently behind the girl, his breathing calm but shallow. The infected didn't turn. Not yet. They passed within arm's length of two of them. Their skin was pale, eyes lifeless, but they didn't attack. They simply walked toward the music box. 50 feet to the barricade. 40. 30. Then Mira tripped. Elara stopped instantly, grabbing the girl's arm and yanking her up. But the sound, the scuffle of boots against debris, was enough. The nearest infected froze. Then it turned. Its jaw dropped open wider than it should have, and it let out a low, echoing moan. Elara, run! Rhine shouted. The horde turned in unison, the stillness shattered like glass. The team bolted. Gate! Open the gate! Juno screamed into her radio as they neared the outer post. From above, floodlights flared on. A guard recognized them. Get in, get in. The gate began to slide open, the defenders inside scrambling to assist. Bullets tore from the walls, suppressing the advancing horde. Kaz crossed through first, clutching the converter. Juno and Griffin followed. Mira fell again, too exhausted to keep going. Elara threw her across the threshold with Rhine's help just as the first infected lunged forward. Rhine turned and shot it point blank in the skull, its body collapsing inches from the open gate. Then the gate slammed shut. Dozens of infected smashed against it, snarling, clawing. But they didn't pile up mindlessly. They stood, watching. Their breath came in unnatural rhythm. It was like they were measuring the humans behind the wall. As silence returned, Griffin stepped back from the barricade, visibly shaken. That wasn't instinct. That was coordination. Which means someone, something, is directing them, Elara finished. Rhine tossed his rifle aside and slumped against the wall. So now they've got tactics. No, Juno said, tightening her grip on the crossbow. Now we've got a war. Back inside the compound, Kaz got to work installing the solar converter into the backup grid. Sparks flew as he made the final connection. The lights flickered, then held steady. Power was restored. Cheers erupted across the camp, but they were short-lived. Elara didn't join them. She stood atop the barricade, staring into the darkness. The infected hadn't retreated. They were still there. Still watching. And deep down, she knew, they were waiting for something. Something worse. The power returned, but with it came unease. The compound's lights hummed overhead as survivors gathered in the main square, murmuring about the strange behavior of the infected. For months, they had fought mindless creatures driven only by hunger. But what they saw tonight, stillness, timing, formation, that was something else. Elara paced the upper catwalk near the south watchtower. Her mind refused to rest. The infected had changed. And Griffin's words echoed louder now, they're listening to something. Inside the command bunker, Kaz was bent over the newly powered communications panel. Dust drifted from the unused console as he rebooted the receiver systems. "We're up," he said. "Power's flowing. I'm rerouting antenna access to scan for active frequencies." Ryan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You think someone's actually broadcasting out there?" Griffin, seated nearby with a scarf still covering part of his face, replied, "Not someone, something. There's a looped signal. It doesn't follow normal emergency bands. It's been bouncing from tower to tower since before I went underground." "Could be military," Juno offered. "Maybe a fail-safe warning." "Or a trap," Mira muttered. She was curled on a cot in the corner, knees drawn to her chest. She hadn't spoken much since the alley. Ilara entered, nodding at Kaz. "Pick it up if you can. Play it loud." Kaz twisted a dial slowly. Static hissed from the speaker. Then a tone broke through, faint, distant, synthetic. It repeated in intervals, a pulsing beep, followed by a distorted voice. "Zeta, line 9, override, phase, initiated, repeat. Phase, initiated." The message looped. They all froze. "What the hell is phase initiated?" Ryan asked. Kaz checked the frequency readout. "This isn't just a radio transmission. It's coded. Could be an old AI beacon or an encrypted military protocol." Griffin stood slowly. "It started near the river. At least, that's where the first flare went up." Ilara narrowed her eyes. "You think someone's sending commands to the infected?" Griffin shrugged. "Or to whatever controls them." A tense silence settled in. Ilara turned to Juno. "Prep a recon team. We're going to the river." Ryan stepped forward. "We just got back. You want to march into whatever that is without backup?" "We don't have time to wait," Ilara said. "The infected are changing. If someone out there is controlling them, or worse, evolving them, we have to know. Before they come through that gate." Within the hour, the team was ready. Juno, Kaz, and Mira joined Ilara and Griffin. Ryan stayed behind to lead the defense. Supplies were tight, and there were only so many fighters they could spare. They left just before midnight under a heavy sky. This time, they traveled the rooftops and sewer lines Griffin knew by heart. The city's silence wasn't peaceful, it was watching them. 2 hours later, they arrived at the Riverside district. Or what was left of it. Buildings lay in ruins. Blackened cars blocked the roads, and strange scorch marks painted the walls. But it wasn't the destruction that stopped them, it was the lights. Soft blue pulses blinked from the upper levels of an old tech tower on the far side of the water. The beacon was real. They crept closer. As they passed the old boardwalk, Mira gasped and pointed. Near the shore, infected stood in a perfect circle. Not moving. Not snarling. Just, listening. Above them, on the tower's top floor, a silhouette paced behind shattered glass. "Someone's up there," Kaz whispered. Juno pulled out her binoculars. "Too far to tell who, but they're not infected." The pulsing signal grew louder as they approached. The circle of undead didn't react, as if the humans didn't exist. "We can't go around them," Ilara said. "We go through." Quiet. Weapons ready, but no gunfire unless absolutely necessary. Griffin nodded. "Whatever's broadcasting from that tower, it's affecting them. Like it's holding them in place." They moved, hearts pounding. As they stepped into the circle's edge, every survivor held their breath. One step. Then another. The infected didn't turn. Didn't twitch. It was like they weren't even alive. Kaz whispered, "Are they, offline?" Ilara didn't respond. Her focus was locked on the tower. Halfway through the circle, the tone changed. The beacon flashed twice. Suddenly, all the infected turned in unison, not toward the survivors, but toward the tower. Then they dropped to their knees. Griffin froze. That's not behavior. That's obedience. And from the top of the tower, a loudspeaker crackled to life. A voice, human, distorted, cold, cut through the night. Observation complete. Phase 1 success. Initiating migration to Phase 2. Humanity has failed. Ilara's eyes widened. Run, she said. But they were already too late. The blue light flared, and the infected rose again. The infected rose in silence. Not snarling. Not charging. Just standing, perfectly still, with glowing blue veins now visible beneath their decaying skin. Their eyes, once blank, shimmered with faint light. The tower's pulse had changed them. Ilara, they're waking up, Mira whispered, trembling beside Juno. We need to get out now, Kaz said, tightening his grip on the crowbar. But Griffin wasn't moving. He stared at the figures and then toward the tower. It's not just a beacon. It's a controller. A damn command center. They knelt before it, Ilara muttered, backing them away. Like soldiers waiting for orders. Juno raised her crossbow, but Ilara stopped her. No. We fire, they swarm. We move, quiet and fast. They retraced their steps along the boardwalk, staying low. But the infected didn't follow. They remained in formation, staring toward the tower as though awaiting something bigger than prey. When they reached the shadows of a half-toppled overpass, Griffin spoke again, quieter now. That voice, on the loudspeaker. I've heard it before. Everyone turned to him. I was stationed at Blackwell Tech during the first months of the outbreak. Before everything fell. They were working on something called the Neural Directive Project, trying to use AI to manage infected populations. Direct them. Keep them away from survivors. You mean control the dead? Kaz said, disgusted. Griffin nodded slowly. Or control what's left inside them. Not the minds. The instincts. Pulse-based command loops. They called it Zeta Link. Juno's eyes narrowed. And let me guess, something went wrong? It wasn't supposed to be activated, Griffin said. At least, not globally. But the day the network lost control, we stopped hearing from every sector. Like someone flipped the switch anyway. Could that voice be AI? Mira asked. Not exactly, Griffin said. It sounded like Dr. Marin Holt, lead architect of Zeta Link. But the cadence, too perfect. Could be her. Could be an imprint. Ilara exhaled hard. So either she's still alive, or her creation is acting like her. A cold silence followed. Then Ilara looked up at the tower. We can't just run from this. We need to get inside. We need to see what's sending the signal. Are you serious? Kaz said, shocked. That's suicide. Not if it gives us answers, she said. If we know how they're controlled, maybe we know how to stop them. They watched the tower. The blue light at the top had dimmed, its pulses now slow and even, resting. That was their window. Griffin led them through the ruins, avoiding all contact with the circle of infected. They reached the tower's ground floor entrance. Shattered glass doors led into a reception hall covered in moss and long-dried blood. Inside, dust floated in the air like snowflakes. Monitors blinked on dead walls. A stairwell spiraled upward. The elevator was dead. Of course. They climbed. Each level revealed fragments of the old world, cubicles covered in charts, white boards with panicked notes, broken drones, and shattered tech. On the 12th floor, Mira found a body slumped at a desk. A pistol lay beside it. She reached out, but Griffin stopped her. No sudden moves. If it's a hybrid. But it was long dead. By the 17th floor, they reached the main control hub. Blue lights pulsed from cables running through the ceiling like veins. Servers hummed softly, somehow still powered. And at the center of the room sat a chair. Someone was in it. Wires snaked into the figure's spine, skull, and arms. A breathing mask was fused to her face. Her hair was silver, and her body unmoving, but her eyes were wide open, glowing faintly blue. Kaz froze. Is that her? Griffin stepped forward. Dr. Marin Holt. Suddenly, screens lit up. A video feed flickered to life. Marin's face appeared, alive, speaking from the past. Zetalink is not a weapon. It is salvation. When the world ends, let the neural directives maintain order until peace returns. Another screen. If this message plays without authorized personnel, it means Zetalink has been compromised. Overriding manual failsafe. Suddenly, alarms wailed. Kaz backed toward the exit. What did we trigger? A synthesized voice rang out across the chamber. Directive breach. Unauthorized presence. Phase 2, target elimination in progress. Outside the tower, the infected shrieked as one. Every light in the building went red. Mira screamed, "They're coming." Ilara turned to Griffin. Shut it down. There has to be a way. He rushed to the control panel. We have seconds. Cover me. Juno and Ilara blocked the door, weapons raised. The screens shifted, showing the horde storming the building's entrance. Griffin's hands flew across the console. A countdown began. Overload engaged. Zetalink core will self-destruct in 90 seconds. What? Kaz shouted. That's not shutting it down, that's... It's the only way. Griffin yelled. We kill the signal, we stop the link. Ilara looked out the window. The infected were climbing the stairs. 90 seconds. That's all they had before the Zetalink core exploded. Griffin's fingers flew across the touchscreen, initiating the override. The entire control room pulsed with crimson light as alerts screamed from every monitor. Containment breach. Core destabilizing. Manual override locked. Evacuate immediately. Below them, the infected stormed the building. Footsteps thundered on the stairwell, growing louder with each second. The AI wasn't just ending the project, it was taking everything down with it. Ilara. Griffin barked. We've got one chance. The service lift shaft. We climb down, 10 floors, jump at 5. Juno checked the ammo in her crossbow. We don't make that jump, we die. We stay here, we die faster, Kaz replied. Mira stood frozen, staring at the glowing woman strapped to the control chair, Dr. Marin Holt. Still breathing. Still connected. She's alive, Mira whispered. No, Ilara said grimly. She was. The AI's using her body as a host to run the directive. She's long gone. Kaz yanked Myra's hand. We move now. They tore open the service shaft hatch just as the first infected burst through the upper stairwell door. The team scrambled into the vertical tunnel, climbing down metal rungs as the countdown echoed behind them. Core overload in 60 seconds. Griffin was first down. Kaz followed with Mira strapped to his back. Ilara brought up the rear, slamming the hatch shut behind her, blocking 2 shrieking infected who clawed just inches from her boots. Don't look down, Griffin muttered. Too late. Juno hissed. At the 5th floor, Griffin stopped and kicked open the access panel. Here. Jump across to the old data storage wing. He leapt, arms swinging for a hanging cable that bridged the shaft to the other side. He barely caught it. Go, he shouted. One by one, they leapt. Juno landed hard and rolled, Kaz swung Mira safely across. Ilara hesitated, infected now howling just above her. She leapt. Caught the cable. Swung. And crashed through the panel, landing hard beside Griffin as the floor shuddered. 30 seconds. They sprinted down the corridor, emergency lights flickering. The windows shattered outward, revealing the river and rooftops ahead. A steel bridge connected this floor to the nearby telecom building. Across that bridge. Ilara pointed. The infected had already begun swarming below. They ran. Metal groaned beneath them. The bridge had long since rusted and cracked. But it held, just barely. 15 seconds. Behind them, the tower's blue light flared. Then. Boom. A massive explosion tore through the night sky. The Zetalink tower erupted in a column of fire and shattered steel. The shockwave knocked them flat as glass rained across the rooftops. Flames spiraled into the clouds. And below, the infected, across the city, suddenly stopped. They twitched. Screamed. Then collapsed. One by one, like puppets with cut strings. The survivors lay on the rooftop, coughing, battered, eyes wide with disbelief. It worked, Griffin gasped. The link's broken. Ilara stood slowly, gripping the ledge for balance. Down below, dozens, hundreds, of infected now lay motionless. Some writhed in confusion, others simply died. Whatever control they had, she said, we destroyed it. Juno looked back at the crumbling tower, black smoke twisting into the stars. Then maybe we've got a real shot now. Mira stared out at the skyline. Is it over? No, Ilara said. But we just bought humanity something we haven't had in a long time. Hope. Back at the compound, the return of the recon team sparked tears, relief, and silence. News of the tower's fall spread fast. And as the survivors stood atop their barricade and watched the stillness settle across the ruined city, they knew things had changed. Not all the infected died. Some still wandered, lost and confused. But without the guiding pulse, they were no longer coordinated. No longer directed. The hive had shattered. Griffin sat in the radio room, scanning frequencies. He found nothing. The signal was gone. No voice. No command. No Zetalink. Ilara met with Rhine in the main war room. We've got time now. Maybe days. Weeks. We use that. Fortify. Grow. Find others. Rhine nodded. You think we'll get attacked again? We will, she said. But next time, they'll be just monsters. Not an army. That night, the compound held its first vigil. Survivors gathered around a fire. Juno played soft music on a salvaged guitar. Kaz handed out stale crackers and juice. Mira sat beside Ilara, smiling weakly for the first time. Above them, the stars returned. For the first time in weeks, the city sky was dark, free of the blue pulse. Free of the signal. Free. And on the barricade wall, painted in fresh white, a message appeared. We stand beyond the barricades. We fight together. We protect the last hope. End of Part 8.